My husband's best friend delivered the most beautiful eulogy I'd ever heard. He knew things about Daniel I didn't favorite songs, private jokes, the way he took his coffee on bad days. I stood at my husband's grave thinking how lucky Daniel was to have been loved like that. It took me 3 weeks to realize the eulogy wasn't written by Marcus. It was written by his wife. I'm Claire Sutton, 39, a high school art teacher in Savannah. Daniel and I were married for 9 years. He died in October, a car accident on I-16, a rainy Tuesday morning, the kind of death that arrives without preparation and leaves without explanation. He was 41. We had a daughter named Wren who was 7 and who still sets a place for him at breakfast sometimes, without realizing she's doing it. Marcus and Daniel had been best friends since college. His wife, Jess, had come into the picture 6 years ago and folded into our lives the way good people do Sunday dinners, Wren's birthday parties, the lake house every August, the kind of friendship that starts to feel like family without anyone deciding it. I thought Jess was my friend. I thought that was the simplest, most obvious thing in my life. The eulogy was extraordinary. Marcus stood at the podium and delivered it word for word, voice breaking in the right places. And I sat in the front row holding Wren's hand, thinking that grief reveals people, that Marcus standing up there was the truest thing I'd seen in the worst week of my life. Afterward, at the reception, Daniel's cousin pulled me aside. She had a look on her face I didn't understand yet. "Did you know Jess wrote that?" she said. "The whole thing. Marcus told me she stayed up 2 nights writing it." I told her that was a beautiful thing to do for a friend's husband. She looked at me for a long moment. "Claire, she wrote it from memory. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled apart the eulogy sentence by sentence, the parts about Daniel's insomnia, the notebook he kept by the bed, the specific way he described feeling useful when he fixed something with his hands. Things I knew, but also things I hadn't told anyone, things no one could research. Jess hadn't gathered those details. She'd lived alongside them. I went to Daniel's phone. I'd never gone through it before, not because I didn't trust him, but because I genuinely didn't feel the need to. I felt the need now. The messages between Daniel and Jess went back 2 years. Not explicit, something more suffocating than that. Thousands of messages. Daily. The specific rhythm of two people who are the first thing each other reaches for in the morning. Inside jokes I'd never heard. A language built between themselves with its own references, its own weight. He'd called her J the way he called me C. The same single letter. The same casual intimacy. They'd never met alone. No hotel rooms, no stolen afternoons. What they had was something some people would argue isn't betrayal at all, which is exactly what made it so total. Daniel had given Jess the parts of himself that don't leave physical evidence. The 2 a.m. thoughts. The fears he'd never said out loud to me. The version of himself he was when nobody was performing anything for anybody. I'd had his body and his life. She'd had his interior world. I sat with that for 6 weeks. I went to work, picked up Wren, made dinner, answered condolence cards, and every night I turned it over quietly, understanding every angle before I decided what to do, the way Daniel used to sit with a structural problem before he touched anything. He taught me that. Measure the whole thing before you cut. First, I needed to know whether Marcus knew. I called him under a simple reason, going through Daniel's things, found lake house photos, did he want copies? We talked for 20 minutes. Marcus cried twice. Nobody performs grief like that for an audience of 1. Marcus didn't know. Which meant Jess had been lying to 2 people simultaneously, the woman she called her closest friend, and the man she went home to every night. I invited Jess to lunch. Just the 2 of us, the way we used to. She came in wearing a soft blouse, ordered her usual, asked about Wren with genuine warmth, and I let the whole lunch happen almost normally, right until the coffee arrived. "I read your eulogy," I said. "The original. On Daniel's phone." Her cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "Not Marcus's version. Yours. The draft you sent Daniel's number 2 days after he died. Before you remembered his phone was still with me. She'd sent it out of grief reflex, texting someone your hands don't know is gone. She'd caught herself and deleted it from her end minutes later. What she didn't know was that it had already downloaded to his phone. Time-stamped. Sitting in his thread with her name on it. "Claire, I want the truth," I said. "Right now, everything. Not because I'm going to use it today. Because I spent 9 years thinking I knew my husband, and I deserved to understand what I actually had." She told me. All of it, slowly, across an hour, while the coffee went cold. 2 years of a relationship that had never been physical, but had been, by every other measure, a parallel marriage. She cried. I didn't, not because I wasn't broken, but because I'd already done that part. And this conversation wasn't for grief. It was for information. When she finished, I asked her one question. Does Marcus know any of it? No, she said. Nothing, I nodded. Picked up the check. And told her I needed some time before we talked again. She left that lunch believing I was processing. That I needed space. That the worst of it was behind her. Because I hadn't screamed. Hadn't threatened. Hadn't done any of the things people do when they're reacting, instead of thinking. What I was actually doing was building. I had the phone records 2 years of daily messages, documented and saved. I had the eulogy draft, time-stamped, in her name. I had her full confession, recorded legally on my phone, sitting in my bag, in a one-party consent state. And I had something else, something she'd handed me herself during that lunch without realizing it. She'd mentioned, quietly, that she and Marcus had been in couples therapy for the past 8 months. That their marriage had been going through something she couldn't fully explain to the therapist, because she couldn't tell the truth about what was really pulling her attention away. 8 months of therapy bills. A marriage quietly deteriorating. A therapist working in the dark because the actual source of the problem was sitting in Jess's phone every morning before Marcus woke up. I didn't go to Marcus directly. I contacted their couples therapist's office and requested a professional consultation as a third party with relevant information pertaining to an active case, something therapists are legally required to consider when the information involves ongoing deception affecting treatment. I didn't record it. I didn't need to. I simply told her, factually, that the patient she was treating had been in a 2-year undisclosed emotional relationship with a recently deceased man, and that this relationship was the direct source of the marital strain she'd been trying to treat for 8 months, without accurate information. What a therapist does with that information is their professional obligation, not mine. I simply made sure the person trying to help Marcus's marriage had the complete picture to work with. Marcus called me 2 weeks later. Not angry, something quieter than that. He said he needed to talk. We sat in my kitchen for 2 hours. I showed him the phone, the messages, the eulogy draft. I played him the lunch recording not to destroy him, but because he deserved the same clarity I'd fought for. He listened to all of it without interrupting once. When it finished, he sat quietly for a long time. She cried at his funeral, he said finally. I held her hand the whole time. I know, I said. I saw. Marcus filed for divorce 6 weeks later. Jess, blindsided by both the therapist's confrontation and Marcus's knowledge arriving at the same time from different directions, had no version of events left to control. Every explanation she'd prepared for one front was useless against the other. She called me once after Marcus filed. I let it go to voicemail. She said she understood why I'd done what I did. She said she didn't blame me. She said she hoped Ren was okay. I deleted the message without saving it. The guardianship paperwork removing Jess and Marcus from Ren's emergency contacts was already filed not out of anger at Marcus, who deserved none of this, but because the people you trust with your child's future need to be people whose honesty you've actually tested. I tested Jess. I had my answer. Marcus sends Ren a birthday card every year. I let her keep that. He was never the villain of this story. And Ren loved him, and some things you protect even when everything around them has burned. Jess moved to Atlanta 8 months after the divorce. I heard through Daniel's cousin that she'd started over new city. New job, new version of her story where she's the one who went through something hard. She did go through something hard. She just also caused it. Ren asked me last month why we don't see Jess anymore. I told her that some friendships change after people go through loss together, and that it didn't mean anyone did anything wrong. She accepted that with the easy faith of a child who still trusts that adults have reasonable explanations for the shape of the world. I'm still working on deserving that trust. But I'm closer than I was. Daniel used to say the truest test of a person was what they did when they thought nobody was watching. He meant it as a compliment, his way of saying he admired quiet integrity. He didn't know, when he said it, that the woman he was saying it about had been watching everything, and remembering all of it, and waiting for exactly the right moment to make sure the people who needed to see it finally did.